The heavy oak doors of Courtroom 4B swung open with a groan that echoed through the marble hallway of the county courthouse. 7-year-old Emma Foster walked through them like a prisoner approaching her sentence, her small Mary Jane shoes clicking softly against the polished floor. Her tiny frame seemed to shrink even smaller as she took in the sea of unfamiliar faces, court reporters, attorneys, social workers, and curious onlookers who had wandered in from other proceedings. The air felt thick, suffocating, heavy, with the weight of adult decisions that would determine the trajectory of her young life. Judge sat elevated behind her imposing bench, her silver hair pulled back in a neat bun that had become her trademark over 23 years on the family court bench. She adjusted her reading glasses and studied the fragile child being led to the witness stand. Something about this case had bothered her from the very beginning, a nagging instinct that whispered that the polished court filings and professional testimonies were hiding something dark beneath their surface. Emma's escort, a kind-faced bailiff named Officer Torres, gently guided her to the witness chair. The chair was far too large for her small body, making her appear even more vulnerable and out of place. Her legs dangled several inches from the floor, swinging nervously back and forth in a rhythmic pattern that betrayed her anxiety. She wore a carefully selected outfit, a pale blue dress with white flowers that her mother had insisted upon, white tights that were already getting twisted at the ankles, and those shiny black shoes that pinched her toes. Her light brown hair had been pulled into two tight braids that pulled at her scalp, reminding her constantly of her mother's hands yanking the brush through her hair that morning while hissing last-minute instructions. Emma's knuckles turned white as she gripped the wooden armrests of the witness chair, her fingernails digging into the grain. Her eyes, a striking hazel that should have sparkled with childhood innocence, instead held a dullness that made Judge's chest tighten with concern. Those were eyes that had seen too much, eyes that had learned to guard secrets. Across the courtroom sat Emma's mother, Foster, positioned at the plaintiff's table like a queen holding court. At 32, was impeccably dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Her hair fell in perfect waves around her shoulders, and her makeup was applied with professional precision, just enough to look polished and maternal, not so much as to appear vain or uncaring. She sat with her spine straight, her chin lifted slightly, and her lips curved in a small, confident smile that never quite reached her cold blue eyes. Her attorney, from one of the city's most prestigious family law firms, sat beside her organizing leather folders with practiced efficiency. Everything about her appearance screamed devoted mother and responsible parent. She had orchestrated this image carefully over the past 8 months, attending every court date in appropriate attire, speaking in measured, emotional tones about her love for her children, and presenting character witnesses who praised her involvement in the PTA and local charity work. To any casual observer, she was the picture of maternal perfection. On the opposite side of the aisle, Emma's father, David Foster, presented a stark contrast. At 35, he looked at least a decade older, worn down by months of fighting a system that seemed determined not to believe him. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, evidence of countless sleepless nights spent researching family law, contacting attorneys he could barely afford, and lying awake worrying about his children. His suit was clean but clearly off the rack and slightly ill-fitting, the tie knotted just a bit too loosely at his throat. His hair needed cutting, and his hands trembled slightly as they rested on the table in front of him. David's attorney, Jennifer, was a dedicated public defender who believed in his case but was clearly outmatched by the resources on side. She had a stack of files that looked thin compared to the multiple briefcases and folders that team had wheeled in. But what Jennifer lacked in resources, she made up for in determination. She had seen something genuine in David's desperation, something that rang true in a way that polished performance did not. The custody battle had been raging for 8 brutal months since the divorce was finalized. Initially, the court had awarded joint custody with Emma and her 4-year-old brother, Tyler, spending alternating weeks with each parent, but had immediately filed motions to modify the arrangement, claiming that David was unstable, that he worked too much, that his apartment was unsuitable, and that the children were suffering under his care. She had presented doctor's notes about Emma's increased anxiety, school reports about missed homework assignments during David's weeks, and testimony from friends who claimed the children seemed unsettled when with their father. What's filings never mentioned was that Emma's anxiety had started long before the custody schedule changed, that the missed homework coincided with the weeks at house, and that those concerned friends were people who had never actually spent time with David and the children together. But in family court, perception often mattered more than reality and was a master of perception management. David had tried to voice his concerns. He had told social workers about the changes he noticed in Emma after her weeks with, how his normally chatty daughter would return silent and withdrawn, how she flinched at sudden movements, how she had started having nightmares that she refused to discuss. He had photographed bruises on Tyler's arms and brought them to Child Protective Services, only to be told they were consistent with normal childhood play. He had documented everything meticulously, but without concrete proof of abuse. His concerns were dismissed as the bitter complaints of a jealous ex-husband trying to weaponize the court system. And now, after months of legal maneuvering, they had arrived at this moment, Emma's testimony. At 7 years old, she was legally old enough for the judge to consider her preference about where she wanted to live. This testimony would likely be the deciding factor in the case. Outside the courtroom doors, on a bench in the hallway, a golden retriever named Bailey lay with his head on his paws, his soulful brown eyes fixed on the closed courtroom doors. Bailey was Emma's registered service dog, trained to help manage her anxiety disorder, a condition that had been diagnosed shortly after her parents' separation. The dog's presence had been approved for the courthouse, but initially, he had not been permitted in the actual courtroom during testimony. Court protocol dictated that only necessary parties be present during proceedings. Bailey whined softly, his tail thumping against the marble floor. The court officer assigned to watch him, a veteran bailiff named, stroked his soft fur. "I know, buddy," she murmured. "I don't like leaving her in there alone either." Back inside courtroom 4B, Judge's gavel echoed through the silent room with 3 sharp cracks that made Emma jump in her seat. The sound reverberated off the high ceilings and paneled walls like a gunshot. "This court is now in session," Judge announced, her voice carrying the authority of more than 2 decades on the bench. "We are here today to hear testimony in the matter of Foster v. Foster, case number 2024 FC08847, regarding the custody arrangement of minor children Emma Rose Foster, age 7, and Tyler James Foster, age 4. The judge's eyes swept across the courtroom before settling on the small figure in the witness chair. Her expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Good morning, Emma." Emma's response was barely audible, a whispered good morning that Judge had to strain to hear despite the courtroom's careful acoustics. "Emma, do you understand why you're here today?" the judge asked gently. The little girl nodded, her braids bouncing slightly with the movement, but she didn't speak. Her eyes had already found her mother's face across the room, and she seemed frozen, trapped in that gaze like a small animal caught in headlights. Smile never wavered, but Judge noticed something that made her pulse quicken. Gave the slightest, almost imperceptible shake of her head, a movement so small that it would have been missed by anyone not watching carefully. But Emma saw it, and the little girl's already pale face went even. Judge's instincts, honed by thousands of hours in family court, began screaming that something was very, very wrong. She leaned forward slightly, studying the child more carefully. This wasn't just nervousness about testifying. This was fear. "Mr. the judge said, you may begin your questioning." Saturni rose smoothly, buttoning his suit jacket with practiced ease. He approached the witness stand with a warm smile that was meant to put Emma at ease, but instead made her press herself back into the chair, as if trying to disappear into the wood. "Hello, Emma," he said in a voice that dripped with false kindness. "I just have a few questions for you today, okay?" Emma nodded again, still not speaking. And as opened his leather folder and prepared to begin questioning that would shape this child's future, Judge felt the weight of responsibility settle onto her shoulders. Whatever happened in the next hour, she thought, would echo through this little girl's life for years to come. She just didn't know yet how right she was, or how one small signal would change everything. Italian leather shoes clicked against the hardwood floor as he positioned himself at a carefully calculated distance from Emma, close enough to appear friendly and approachable, but not so close as to seem intimidating to observers. He had perfected this technique over 15 years of family law practice, understanding that body language and optics mattered almost as much as the words spoken in these proceedings. His smile remained plastered on his face, though his eyes held the calculating gleam of a predator who had already decided the outcome of this hunt. "Emma, sweetheart," he began, his voice taking on that patronizing tone that adults often use with children when they want something from them. "I know this might feel a little scary, being up here with all these people watching, but I promise, we're all here because we care about you and want what's best for you. Does that make sense?" Emma's response was mechanical, her voice flat and emotionless. "Yes, sir." Judge's pen paused mid-note. That response had come too quickly, too perfectly. It was the kind of answer that came from extensive coaching, not natural childhood interaction. "Wonderful," continued, consulting his notes with theatrical precision. "Now, Emma, you live with your mother, Mrs. Foster, is that correct?" "Yes, sir." Again, that immediate, lifeless response. "And how do you like living with your mother?" Emma's lips moved and the words came out in a strange, sing-song rhythm that made Judge's skin crawl. "I love living with Mommy. She takes very good care of me and Tyler. She makes us good meals and helps us with our homework. She's really nice to me." The words themselves were perfectly appropriate, exactly what any judge would want to hear from a child in a custody hearing. But the delivery was all wrong. Emma spoke like a student reciting a memorized poem for a class assignment, hitting each word with practiced precision but no genuine feeling. Her eyes remained fixed on a point somewhere past left shoulder, unfocused and distant, as if she had retreated somewhere deep inside herself where the courtroom couldn't reach her. David Foster leaned forward in his chair, his hands gripping the edge of the table so hard that his knuckles went white. Jennifer placed a restraining hand on his forearm, but she too was frowning, her legal pad filling with rapid observations about Emma's demeanor and speech patterns. "That's lovely to hear," said, though Judge noticed he hadn't actually asked a question. "And your mother spends a lot of time with you, doesn't she? Playing games, reading stories, that sort of thing." "Yes, sir. Mommy always has time for us. She reads to us every night before bed and plays with us in the backyard." The words continued in that same rehearsed cadence, as if Emma were reading from an invisible script floating in the air before her. But it was Emma's body language that told the real story, the story that her carefully coached words were designed to hide. After every sentence, her eyes would flick rapidly toward her mother's table, seeking approval like a performer checking for the director's nod. Each time her gaze landed on, Emma's small body would tense visibly, her shoulders drawing up almost imperceptibly toward her ears. Her hands, which had been gripping the armrests, now twisted together in her lap, the fingers wringing and knotting with increasing anxiety. Judge had seen this pattern before, though never quite this pronounced. In her 23 years on the bench, she had witnessed countless children caught between warring parents, and she had learned to read the subtle signs of coaching, manipulation, and fear. But this case was setting off alarm bells that went beyond typical custody battle dynamics. "Now, Emma," continued, his tone remaining syrupy sweet, "when you stay at your father's house, how do you feel?" For the first time, Emma hesitated. Her mouth opened, then closed. A slight tremor ran through her small frame, and Judge saw actual confusion cross the child's face, as if she hadn't been given the script for this particular question, or as if two different scripts were competing in her mind. Emma began, and her voice cracked slightly. She cleared her throat, and Judge noticed the little girl's eyes dart once more to her mother. This time, its expression had shifted ever so slightly. The smile remained, but there was a hardness around her eyes, a subtle narrowing that communicated a clear message to anyone trained to read such signals. Stay on script. Emma's face went completely blank, and when she spoke again, the words came out in that same mechanical rhythm. Daddy's house is okay, but I miss Mommy when I'm there. I like being with Mommy better. David's sharp intake of breath was audible even from across the courtroom. Jennifer's hand tightened on his arm as he half rose from his chair. "Your Honor," he said, his voice rough with emotion and desperation, "please, this isn't." "Mr. Foster," Judge's voice cut through his protest like a knife, though not unkindly. "You will have your opportunity to speak. Please sit down." David sank back into his chair, but tears were now streaming openly down his face. He had heard these exact words before, these precise phrases. During the supervised exchanges when picked up the children, he had heard her drilling Emma in the parking lot, making her repeat these same sentences over and over. He had reported it to his attorney, to the court-appointed guardian ad, to anyone who would listen. But without video evidence, without witnesses, it had been dismissed as parental paranoia. Jennifer was writing furiously on her legal pad, underlining certain phrases multiple times. She had spent enough time with Emma during preparation meetings to know that this stilted, robotic speech pattern was nothing like the child's natural way of talking. When Emma was comfortable, she was animated, talkative, full of the natural tangents and enthusiasms of childhood. This was something else entirely. This was a child who had been programmed. "Emma, sweetie," pressed on, sensing he was winning, "has your father ever done anything that made you feel unsafe or uncomfortable?" Another pause. Longer this time. Emma's breathing had become shallow and rapid, her small chest rising and falling beneath the carefully selected blue dress. A fine sheen of perspiration had appeared on her forehead despite the courtroom's perfectly controlled temperature. Her eyes were wider now, showing white all around the hazel irises, and Judge recognized that look. It was the expression of someone caught in an impossible trap, being forced to choose between two terrible options. "Emma," prompted, his voice taking on the slightest edge of impatience that he quickly masked with another smile. "You can tell us the truth. No one will be angry with you." That statement hung in the air like a lie so obvious that even the court reporter looked up from her stenography machine. Because everyone in that courtroom knew that someone would be very angry indeed, depending on what Emma said. "Daddy never hurt me," Emma finally whispered, and these words, finally, carried a ring of genuine truth. They came from somewhere deeper than the rehearsed script, bursting out as if they couldn't be contained. "Daddy is good to us. He makes us pancakes and takes us to the park and helps me with my math homework even though he doesn't understand the new way they teach it and—" Emma's voice cut across the courtroom, sharp and commanding despite its low volume. It was barely more than a whisper, but it snapped like a whip crack. "Remember what we talked about." The courtroom erupted. Jennifer shot to her feet. "Objection! Your Honor, the witness is being coached by the plaintiff." Wheeled around. "Your Honor," Mrs. Foster was simply reminding her daughter to. "Enough!" Judge's gavel came down with a crack that silenced everyone. Her face had gone hard, her eyes blazing with an anger that veteran court observers recognized as a very bad sign for whoever had provoked it. "Mrs. Foster, you will not speak to the witness during testimony. Is that understood?" Perfect composure flickered for just a moment, a crack appearing in the carefully constructed facade. "Your Honor, I apologize. I just wanted to remind Emma to take her time in." That was not a request for explanation, Mrs. Foster. That was a directive. One more interruption and you will be removed from this courtroom. Mr. Control your client." The attorney nodded stiffly, but Judge noticed that expression had shifted into something uglier beneath the surface. The maternal mask had slipped just enough to reveal something cold and calculating underneath. Emma had gone completely silent, her face now ashen white. The little girl's entire body was trembling, and Judge could see tears beginning to form in the corners of her eyes, though Emma was clearly fighting desperately to hold them back. Her hands had returned to gripping the armrests, her small knuckles bone-white with the strain. "Let's take a 10-minute recess," Judge announced, her tone brooking no argument. "Emma, you can step down for a moment. Officer Torres will take you to the witness room where you can have some water." But as Officer Torres approached to help Emma down from the witness stand, the little girl didn't move. She sat frozen in place, her eyes locked on her mother's face with an expression that Judge had seen too many times in her career. The look of a child who knew she had just made a terrible mistake and would pay for it later. "Emma," Officer Torres said gently, extending his hand. "Come on, sweetheart, let's get you that water." Still, Emma didn't move. A single tear escaped and rolled down her cheek, followed by another, and then suddenly she was crying, not the loud, dramatic sobs of a child seeking attention, but the silent, shoulder-shaking tears of someone who had learned that crying out loud brought punishment. David was on his feet again, and this time neither his attorney nor the judge stopped him. "Emma, baby, it's okay. You're okay." But Emma's eyes remained fixed on her mother, and stared back with an expression that sent chills down Judge's spine. It was a look of pure, cold fury, barely masked by the thinnest veneer of concern. And in that moment, Judge made a decision that would change everything. This wasn't just a contentious custody battle between divorced parents. This was something darker, something that her years of experience and hard-won instincts told her was dangerous. Whatever was happening in Foster's home, whatever control she held over this terrified child, was about to be brought into the light. Judge just had to figure out how to get Emma to tell the truth when the little girl was clearly too terrified to speak freely. Then her eyes landed on the closed courtroom doors, beyond which a golden retriever waited patiently for his girl. And Judge knew exactly what she needed to do. Judge sat behind her imposing bench, her fingers steepled beneath her chin as she watched Emma Foster's small frame shake with silent sobs. In 23 years of presiding over family court, she had developed what her colleagues called an internal compass and instinct that guided her when the law and procedure weren't enough to uncover the truth. That compass was now spinning wildly, pointing toward something deeply wrong in this courtroom. The 10-minute recess had stretched to 15, and Emma still hadn't moved from the witness chair. Officer Torres stood nearby, his usually jovial face creased with concern, unsure whether to physically remove the child or wait for her to move on her own. The court reporter had left to use the restroom, and the attorneys on both sides were huddled with their clients, whispering urgently. But Judge's attention remained fixed on the little girl, who seemed to have retreated so far inside herself that she might never find her way back out. "Your Honor," Jennifer approached the bench, her voice low and urgent. "Permission to approach." Judge nodded, and both attorneys came forward, Jennifer representing David Foster, and for Foster. They spoke in hushed tones that wouldn't carry to the rest of the courtroom, a familiar dance of legal maneuvering. "Your Honor," Jennifer began, her words coming quickly, "I move for an immediate psychological evaluation of the minor child. What we're witnessing here is clearly a trauma response. This child has been coached to the point of—" "Objection," interrupted smoothly, though his usual polished demeanor had developed some cracks. "Ms. is making assumptions without evidence. The child is simply nervous, as any 7-year-old would be in these circumstances. My client has done nothing wrong, and these accusations of coaching are baseless attempts to—" Mr. Judge's voice was quiet but carried the weight of absolute authority. I have eyes, I have ears, and I have over 2 decades of experience watching children testify in this courtroom. That child is not simply nervous. That child is terrified. Opened his mouth to respond, but Judge raised her hand. However, Ms., I cannot order a psychological evaluation based solely on courtroom behavior without additional evidence or testimony. What I can do is make sure this child is comfortable enough to actually tell us what's happening in her life. She paused, her mind racing through options and their potential legal ramifications. What she was considering was highly irregular, possibly unprecedented in her courtroom. It would certainly be grounds for an appeal if she wasn't careful, but every instinct she possessed was screaming that if she didn't act now, this child would leave her courtroom and return to a situation that was causing genuine harm. I'm going to allow the service dog into the courtroom, Judge announced. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Face flushed red. Your Honor, that's highly irregular. There's no precedent for. There's precedent for me to run my courtroom as I see fit to uncover the truth, Mr. The child has a registered service animal prescribed for anxiety disorder. I am exercising my discretion to allow that animal to be present to help the child testify clearly, unless you'd like to argue that you prefer this child to remain in a state of extreme distress. It was a rhetorical trap and knew it. Arguing against the dog's presence would make him, and by extension, his client, look callous and uncaring about the child's. He exchanged a quick, sharp glance with, whose perfect composure had developed visible cracks. Her jaw was clenched tight, and her manicured fingers were now gripping her leather folder hard enough to leave indentations. Of course we want Emma to be comfortable, Your Honor, said through what appeared to be gritted teeth. However, this seems like theatrics designed to garner sympathy and prejudice the court against my client. A service dog in the courtroom during testimony is exactly what I'm ordering, Judge cut him off. Officer Torres, please bring in Bailey. The bailiff looked surprised but quickly moved to follow the order, his boots echoing across the marble floor as he headed toward the courtroom doors. The room fell into an expectant silence broken only by Emma's quiet, hiccuping breaths and the rustling of papers as people shifted in their seats. David Foster's face had transformed with hope so desperate it was almost painful to witness. He leaned forward in his chair, his hands clasped together as if in prayer, while Jennifer placed a supportive hand on his shoulder. Across the aisle, sat rigid as a statue, her blue eyes fixed on her daughter with an intensity that made Judge deeply uncomfortable. The courtroom doors swung open with a soft whoosh, and Bailey entered with Officer holding his leash. The golden retriever was magnificent, his coat gleaming like spun gold under the fluorescent lights, his dark eyes intelligent and alert as they swept the courtroom. He was clearly well trained. Despite the unusual environment and the crowd of people, he walked calmly beside Officer, his tail at a neutral position, his ears perked forward with professional attention. But the moment Bailey's eyes found Emma, everything changed. The dog's entire body tensed, his ears swiveling forward with laser focus. A soft whine escaped his throat, not loud but filled with such concern that it made several people in the gallery lean forward to see better. His tail began to wag frantically, and he pulled against the leash with gentle but persistent pressure, trying to reach his girl. "It's okay, boy," Officer murmured, unclipping the leash once they were inside the courtroom proper. "Go ahead." Bailey didn't need to be told twice. The golden retriever bounded across the courtroom with a grace that belied his size, his paws barely making a sound on the hardwood floor. He navigated around the tables and chairs with practiced ease, making a beeline straight for the witness stand where Emma sat frozen. The transformation in Emma Foster was instantaneous and profound. The moment she saw Bailey, her face, which had been locked in that terrible mask of fear and resignation, cracked open like an egg. "Bailey," she gasped, and the word carried more genuine emotion than anything else she had said in the entire proceeding. Emma practically threw herself from the witness chair, dropping to her knees on the floor as Bailey reached her. The dog immediately pressed his solid, warm body against her, his tail wagging so hard his entire back end swayed with the motion. Emma buried her face in his thick golden fur, her small arms wrapping around his neck as if he were the only solid thing in a world that had turned to quicksand. Bailey stood perfectly still, allowing Emma to clutch him as tightly as she needed. His head turned, and he began licking her face with gentle precision, his pink tongue catching her tears. The dog made soft sounds, not quite barks, but vocalizations of concern and comfort that resonated through the silent courtroom like a conversation in a language older than words. Judge felt her throat tighten with emotion, but she maintained her professional composure. Around the courtroom, she noticed that she wasn't the only one affected. The court reporter had returned and was wiping at her eyes with a tissue. Officer Torres had turned away slightly, clearing his throat, even looked uncomfortable, though he was trying hard to maintain his professional mask. David Foster was crying openly now, tears streaming down his face as he watched his daughter finally show genuine emotion. "That's my girl," he whispered, though no one but Jennifer could hear him. "That's my Emma." But Foster's reaction was entirely different. Her face had gone pale, then flushed with barely contained anger. Her hands gripped the edge of the table so hard that her perfectly manicured nails were leaving scratches in the wood. Her lips had pressed into a thin, bloodless line, and her eyes had gone cold and hard as chips of ice. Emma remained on the floor with Bailey for nearly a full minute, and Judge let the moment stretch. She watched the child's breathing begin to steady, watched the terrible tension in those small shoulders gradually release. Bailey seemed to sense exactly what Emma needed, pressing closer when her grip tightened, pulling back slightly when she needed space to breathe. Finally, Emma lifted her face from Bailey's fur. Her eyes were red and swollen, her carefully done braids were coming loose, and her dress was now covered in golden dog hair. But for the first time since entering the courtroom, she looked like an actual 7-year-old child rather than a frightened automaton. "Emma," Judge said gently, "would you like Bailey to stay with you while we talk?" Emma nodded vigorously, her arms still wrapped around the dog's neck. "Yes, please," she whispered, and her voice, though still small, carried a note of genuine feeling that had been entirely absent before. "Then that's what we'll do. Officer Torres, please help Emma back into the witness chair. Bailey can sit right beside her." As Officer Torres helped Emma stand and guided her back to the witness chair, Bailey followed without needing to be told, positioning himself right next to where Emma would sit. The moment she was settled, the dog pressed against her leg, and Emma's right hand immediately dove into his fur, her fingers knotting in the thick golden coat as if anchoring herself to reality. "Your Honor, I must object to this irregular procedure," tried one more time, but his heart clearly wasn't in it. "This is prejudicial and—" "Objection noted and overruled," Judge said crisply. "Mister, if you have a problem with my courtroom management, you're welcome to file an appeal. But right now, we're going to continue this testimony with the service dog present. Are we clear?" Nodded stiffly and returned to his table, where was whispering urgently in his ear. He shook his head at whatever she was saying, trying to calm her, but Judge could see that Foster was barely maintaining control. "Now then," Judge said, her voice deliberately calm and gentle as she addressed Emma directly, "let's try this again. Emma, I know this is hard, but I need you to answer some questions as honestly as you can. Bailey is right here with you, and nobody is going to hurt you for telling the truth. Do you understand?" Emma nodded, her hands still buried in Bailey's fur, her fingers moving in slow, rhythmic patterns through the thick coat. Judge noticed the movement but didn't think much of it yet. It seemed like natural self-soothing behavior, the kind of repetitive motion that anxious people often use to calm themselves. "Okay," the judge continued. "I'm going to ask you some questions myself. Mr. Ms., you'll both have a chance to follow up, but right now, I want to hear from Emma without the formal back and forth. Emma, Can you tell me about a normal day at your mother's house? Just describe what happens from when you wake up until you go to bed." Emma opened her mouth to speak, and Judge leaned forward slightly, hoping that with Bailey's presence, the child might finally tell them what was really happening behind Foster's carefully constructed facade. What happened next would shock everyone in the courtroom and change the course of the entire case. Emma's fingers continued their gentle, rhythmic movement through Bailey's golden fur as she began to speak. Her voice was still soft, still hesitant, but there was a subtle difference now, a slight warming, like ice beginning to thaw at the edges. Bailey's presence had created a small bubble of safety around her, a shield against the oppressive weight of adult expectations and hidden threats that filled the courtroom. "When I wake up at Mommy's house," Emma began, her words coming slowly, carefully, "Mommy makes us breakfast, usually cereal or toast." She paused, her eyes flickering towards table, and Judge watched that familiar fear begin to creep back into the child's expression. "Mommy is very nice. She helps us get ready for school and there it was again, that strange mechanical quality returning to her voice, the rehearsed script reasserting itself like a recording being played. Judge's heart sank slightly. Even with Bailey present, the conditioning was so deeply ingrained that Emma was slipping back into the safe, approved narrative. But then Judge noticed something odd. Emma's right hand, which was buried in Bailey's fur, wasn't moving randomly. The fingers weren't simply petting or stroking the way one might absent-mindedly touch a beloved pet. The movements were deliberate, precise, following a specific pattern that repeated itself with mechanical regularity. 3 quick movements, her fingers pressing into Bailey's coat in rapid succession. Tap, tap, tap. Then 3 longer, slower movements, her fingers dragging through the fur with more pressure. Stroke, stroke, stroke. Then 3 quick movements again. Tap, tap, tap. Judge's breath caught in her throat. Her brother, Michael, had served 20 years in the Navy before retiring, much of that time as a communications specialist. During family gatherings, he'd entertained his nieces and nephews by teaching them Morse code, turning it into a game. Had picked up enough to recognize the basics, and what she was seeing now made her blood run cold. 3 short signals, 3 long signals, 3 short signals. That was SOS, the universal distress signal, recognized worldwide as a cry for help. This 7-year-old child was literally spelling out a call for rescue in Morse code, using her dog's fur as the telegraph key, while simultaneously reciting the approved script her mother had drilled into her. The sophistication of it, the desperate cleverness, the sheer courage it took for a child to think of such a thing. It was both heartbreaking and remarkable. Judge forced herself to remain composed, to keep her face neutral even as her mind raced. She couldn't react visibly, couldn't alert anyone else to what she was seeing, especially not, who was watching her daughter with the intensity of a hawk monitoring its prey. If realized that Emma was sending a distress signal, there was no telling what might happen when the child returned to her custody. Bailey, for his part, had clearly noticed the pattern as well. Service dogs were trained to recognize and respond to specific signals from their handlers, and Bailey's training was evidently extensive. Each time Emma's fingers completed the SOS pattern, the dog would shift slightly, pressing more firmly against her leg. His ears would swivel back, then forward again, and a soft whine, almost inaudible but definitely present, would rumble in his throat. "And then Mommy picks us up from school," Emma was saying, her voice maintaining that sing-song quality of recitation even as her fingers continued their desperate Morse code message. Tap, 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 stroke, 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 tap, tap, tap. And we have dinner together. Mommy makes good dinners, spaghetti and chicken and... The SOS pattern repeated. Then again. Bailey's whining grew slightly louder, and he turned his head to look up at Emma with those intelligent brown eyes, as if trying to communicate something to the humans in the room who were too blind to see what was happening right in front of them. Shifted uncomfortably at his table. "Your Honor, the dog seems to be disturbing the witness. Perhaps it would be better to..." "The dog stays," Judge said firmly, her eyes never leaving Emma's hand moving through Bailey's fur. She needed to see this pattern again, needed to be absolutely certain of what she was witnessing. Emma, continue please. What happens after dinner? Emma's face had gone very still, very focused. Her eyes had glazed over slightly, as if she were somewhere far away, and Judge realized with a shock that the child had essentially dissociated. Her conscious mind reciting the approved script while her subconscious, her true self, was screaming for help through the only channel available to her. After dinner we do homework, Emma continued in that flat, emotionless voice. Mommy helps us with our homework. Then we watch a little TV and then bedtime. Mommy reads us stories and tucks us in and tab, 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 stroke, 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 tab, tab, tab. The pattern was unmistakable now. Judge's pulse was racing, but she kept her expression carefully neutral, judicial, merely interested. She glanced subtly around the courtroom to see if anyone else had noticed, but most people were watching Emma's face, listening to her words. Only David Foster seemed to have noticed something odd about his daughter's hand movements. He was leaning forward, squinting slightly, his brow furrowed with confusion and growing concern. Jennifer noticed her client's reaction and followed his gaze to Emma's hand. Her eyes widened almost imperceptibly, and she began writing something on her legal pad with quick, urgent strokes. Emma, Judge said carefully, I notice you're petting Bailey a lot. Does that help you feel calmer? It was a risk drawing attention to the very thing she was trying to observe without tipping off. But Emma's response was perfect. She nodded, and for just a moment her eyes cleared and focused directly on Judge with an intensity that was shocking. In that brief moment of connection, the child's true self broke through the conditioning, and her eyes screamed what her mouth could not say. Help me, please. Someone see what I'm doing. Help me. Then the mask slammed back down and Emma's voice resumed its recitation. Yes, Bailey makes me feel better. I like having him here. But her hand never stopped. Tap, 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 stroke, 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 tap, tap, tap. Had noticed Judge's attention to Emma's hand movements now, and her face had tightened with something that might have been concern to a casual observer, but that Judge recognized as barely suppressed fury. Leaned toward her attorney, whispering urgently, and nodded, then stood. Your Honor, I think we've heard enough about the daily routine at Mrs. Foster's home. Perhaps we could move on to questions about the father's residence and I'll determine when we've heard enough, Mr. Judge said sharply. Sit down. The attorney sat, but's face had gone from pale to flushed. Her carefully maintained composure was cracking like old paint, revealing the rage beneath. Judge realized with growing alarm that knew, or at least suspected, that something was going wrong, that her carefully orchestrated performance was unraveling. Emma, Judge continued, her voice deliberately gentle, you mentioned that your daddy taught you and played games with you. What kind of games do you play with your father? This question wasn't on anyone's prepared list. It was a departure from the standard custody hearing script, and Judge saw both attorneys sit up, preparing to object while Jennifer's pen hovered over her notepad, waiting to see where this was going. For the first time since Bailey had entered the courtroom, Emma's mechanical recitation faltered. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. Her fingers stopped their Morse code pattern, pressing flat against Bailey's back, and the dog immediately shifted, looking up at her with concern. Daddy, Emma started, and her voice cracked. A real emotion, not fear, but something warmer, sadder, flickered across her face. Daddy taught me Morse code. The courtroom went absolutely silent. Even the usual ambient sounds, the rustling of papers, the creaking of wooden benches, the muffled sounds from the hallway outside, seemed to fade into nothingness. Everyone was suddenly paying attention in a way they hadn't been before, sensing that something significant had just been revealed. Morse code, Judge kept her voice carefully neutral though her heart was hammering. That's interesting. Why did your daddy teach you that? Emma's eyes filled with tears, real tears this time, not the silent, terrified crying from earlier, but something that carried genuine grief and longing. He said it was our special language. He said that even if we couldn't be together all the time, we could send messages to each other. He said, her voice dropped to barely a whisper, he said that if I ever needed help and couldn't say the words out loud, I could use Morse code and someone who knew it would understand. David Foster made a choking sound, his hands coming up to cover his face as he broke down completely. Jennifer's hand gripped his shoulder while she stared at Emma with dawning comprehension. She grabbed her phone, fingers flying across the screen, clearly looking something up. "That's very clever," Judge said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Do you remember any of it?" Emma nodded slowly and then, maintaining eye contact with Judge in a way she hadn't done throughout the entire proceeding, she said very quietly, "I remember SOS. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. It means you need help." And as she spoke, her hand resumed its pattern through Bailey's fur, demonstrating for everyone in the courtroom exactly what she'd been doing for the past 10 minutes. Tap, tap, tap. Stroke, stroke, stroke. Tap, tap, tap. The courtroom erupted. Jennifer shot to her feet. "Your Honor, this child has been signaling distress throughout her testimony. She's been literally crying for help in code because she's too afraid to speak the truth out loud." Was shouting objections about speculation and improper influence, but his voice was drowned out by David Foster's anguished sobs and the sudden buzz of conversation from the gallery. Foster stood abruptly, her chair scraping across the floor with a screech that cut through the chaos. "This is ridiculous. She's making it up. David put her up to this. He's been coaching her too." "Mrs. Foster, sit down." Judge gavel came down like a gunshot. "Sit down now." Bailey had risen to all 4 feet now, positioning himself between Emma and the rest of the courtroom, his body tense and alert. The dog's training was evident in how he remained controlled, but there was no mistaking the protective stance he'd assumed. His eyes were fixed on Foster, and a low rumble, not quite a growl but definitely a warning, emanated from his chest. Emma had pulled her knees up to her chest in the witness chair, making herself as small as possible, her face buried against Bailey's neck as the chaos swirled around her. But Judge had seen enough, more than enough. This child had found a way to scream for help while being forced to lie. She had used the one tool her father had given her, their special language to tell the truth her mother had forbidden her to speak. And Judge would be damned if she was going to ignore that cry for help. "This court is in recess," she announced, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. 30 minutes. Emma, you're coming to my chambers. Bailey too. Officer Torres, officer, I want you both present. Mr. Ms., you're welcome to join us, but Mrs. Foster and Mr. Foster will remain in the courtroom. Anyone who has a problem with that can file an appeal." She looked directly at Emma, her expression softening. "Emma, sweetheart, it's time to tell us the truth, the real truth. And this time nobody is going to stop you." Judge's chambers were a stark contrast to the formal courtroom. Bookcases lined with leather-bound legal volumes, a large mahogany desk covered with case files, and a small seating area with a comfortable couch that had seen countless attorneys and social workers over the years. Soft afternoon light filtered through the half-closed blinds, creating striped shadows across the Persian rug. On the walls hung various commendations and her law degree, but also scattered family photos that humanized the space. Reminders that behind the black robe was a woman who understood what family was supposed to mean. Emma Foster sat on that couch now, still clutching Bailey's fur as if the dog were the only thing tethering her to reality. The golden retriever had positioned himself so that Emma could lean against his solid warmth, his head resting on her lap in a posture of infinite patience and protection. Officer Torres stood near the door, his usually jovial face serious and alert. Officer sat in one of the chairs, having been the one caring for Bailey in the hallway and understanding the dog's signals better than most. Jennifer sat in another chair, her legal pad balanced on her knee, ready to document everything but trying to appear as non-threatening as possible. Had chosen to remain in the courtroom with his client after Judge made it clear that this was not going to be a formal proceeding, but rather what she termed a welfare check, her judicial discretion to ensure a child's safety when concerns arose during testimony. Dr. Sarah Winters, the court-appointed child psychologist who had been observing from the gallery, had been summoned as well. She was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor that had helped countless traumatized children find their voices over her 30-year career. She sat quietly in the corner, simply observing for now, letting Judge lead. Judge had removed her judicial robe, hanging it carefully on the coat rack behind her desk. In her simple blouse and skirt, she looked less like an intimidating authority figure and more like someone's grandmother, which in fact she was. She pulled a chair over to sit directly across from Emma, maintaining eye level with the child, careful not to loom or intimidate. "Emma," she began softly, "I want you to know that what we talk about in here is private. Yes, there are other adults here, but they're all here to help you, not to judge you or get you in trouble. Do you understand?" Emma nodded but didn't speak. Her fingers continued their nervous movement through Bailey's fur, though the Morse code pattern had stopped. Now it was just random, anxious petting, seeking comfort. "Can you tell me about the Morse code?" Judge asked. "When did your daddy teach you that?" For the first time since entering the chambers, a small smile flickered across Emma's face, brief and fragile but genuine. "Last year," she said quietly. Before everything got bad. Daddy said he learned it from Grandpa Foster, who was in the army. He said it was like a secret spy language, and we could send messages nobody else would understand." "That sounds like fun," Judge encouraged. "Did you practice together?" "Yeah, at bedtime, Daddy would tap messages on my bedroom wall and I had to tap back the answer, like good night or I love you. Tyler was too little to learn, but Daddy said when he got bigger, we'd all know it together." The smile faded as quickly as it had appeared. "But then Mommy and Daddy got divorced, and we don't get to play those games anymore." Jennifer was writing quickly but quietly, documenting every word. Dr. Winters leaned forward slightly, her expression thoughtful. "Emma," Judge continued, keeping her voice gentle but direct, "in the courtroom just now, you were using Morse code to signal SOS. Why did you do that?" The little girl's face went very still. She looked down at her hands buried in Bailey's fur, and for a long moment, Judge thought she might retreat back into that defensive shell of rehearsed responses. Bailey shifted, pressing more firmly against Emma's leg, and made a soft sound, not quite a whine but a gentle vocalization that seemed to say, "I'm here. You're safe." "Because," Emma finally whispered, so quietly that everyone had to strain to hear, "I couldn't say the words. If I said the words out loud, Mommy would know, and then—" She trailed off, her small body beginning to tremble. "And then what, sweetheart?" Dr. Winters spoke for the first time, her voice professionally calm but warm. "What would happen if Mommy knew?" Emma's eyes filled with tears. "She said if I ever told anyone our secrets, would leave, and it would be all my fault. She said they'd probably take Tyler away and put him with strangers who would be mean to him. She said Daddy would get in trouble for lying about them, and maybe he'd have to go to jail. She said nobody would believe a little kid anyway, so there was no point in telling." Judge felt her jaw clench with barely controlled anger, but she kept her expression neutral and supportive. "Emma, who is?" "Mommy's boyfriend." Emma said it matter-of-factly, as if this were common knowledge. "He lives with us." Jennifer's head snapped up. She flipped rapidly through her papers, finding what she was looking for. "Your Honor, the custody agreement specifically states that no unrelated adults are to reside in the home without court approval and background checks. Mrs. Foster was granted custody based on representations that she lived alone with the children." Judge held up a hand, acknowledging the attorney but keeping her focus on Emma. "How long has lived with you, Emma?" I think since right after the divorce. He used to just visit, but then he moved in. He has his clothes in Mommy's closet and everything. Mommy said we couldn't tell anyone because the judge," she glanced up at Judge, "because you said he couldn't live there. But Mommy said it was fine because you just didn't understand how much she loved him." "I see," Judge said carefully. "And what is like? How does he treat you and Tyler?" Emma's trembling increased. Bailey sensed the rising distress and stood up, positioning himself so that Emma could wrap her arms completely around his neck and hide her face in his fur. The dog stood rock steady, a living shield between the child and her memories. "He has a bad temper," Emma's muffled voice came from where her face was pressed against Bailey. "He yells a lot, especially when he's been drinking the bottles that make the house smell funny. He says Tyler is annoying because he cries too much. Tyler's only 4, he's supposed to cry sometimes, but doesn't like it." "Has ever hurt Tyler?" Judge asked, though she could already feel the answer coming like a storm on the horizon. Emma nodded against Bailey's fur. "He grabbed Tyler really hard once, left marks on his arms, purple and blue marks. Tyler cried for a long time. Mommy said it was an accident that just didn't know his own strength, but I saw his face when he did it. He looked angry, really angry, like he wanted to hurt Tyler worse but stopped himself." Dr. Winters and Judge exchanged a significant look. Physical marks meant documented evidence, if they still existed. "Emma," Officer spoke up, his voice gentle, "does Tyler still have those marks?" "I don't know," Emma said. "It happened a few weeks ago. They were gone last time I looked, but there were new ones, smaller ones, on his legs this time." Jennifer was already pulling out her phone. "Your Honor, I need to request an immediate examination of the minor child Tyler Foster, if there are current injuries." "Already on it," Judge said grimly, reaching for her desk phone. "Officer Torres, radio for a Child Protective Services emergency response team. I want Tyler Foster picked up from wherever he is right now and brought directly to County Children's Hospital for a full medical examination. No stops. No notifications to the mother until the child is secure." Officer Torres nodded and stepped into the hallway, speaking urgently into his radio. Emma had lifted her head from Bailey's fur, her eyes wide. "Is Tyler going to be okay? I tried to protect him. I really tried. When gets mad, I try to distract him, or I take Tyler to our room and we play quietly so doesn't hear us. But sometimes Tyler forgets and makes noise, or he gets hungry and asks for snacks when he's watching TV, and then gets really mad and—" Dr. Winters moved to sit beside Emma on the couch, placing a gentle hand on the child's shoulder. "You've been very brave, Emma, very brave. But protecting your little brother isn't your job. That's what adults are supposed to do. It's not your fault when gets angry. Do you understand? None of this is your fault." "But Mommy said—" "Your mommy was wrong," Judge said firmly but not harshly. "Adults who love children don't make them keep dangerous secrets. They don't coach them to lie in court. And they certainly don't allow anyone to hurt them or their siblings. What you've been dealing with, Emma, is called abuse, and it stops today." Emma stared at Judge with an expression that cycled through disbelief, hope, fear, and finally landed on something that looked like desperate, fragile trust. So Tyler is going to be safe." "Tyler is going to be safe," Judge confirmed. "And so are you. Neither of you are going back to your mother's house until we figure out exactly what's been happening there." "But Mommy said if I told, Daddy would get in trouble." "Your daddy is not in trouble. Your daddy tried to tell people something was wrong, and nobody listened to him because we didn't have enough evidence. You just gave us that evidence, Emma. Your daddy was right to be worried." Emma's face crumpled and she began to cry, not the silent, terrified tears from the courtroom, but the loud, messy, hiccuping sobs of a child who had been holding in too much for too long. Bailey pressed closer, and Dr. Winters wrapped an arm around Emma's shoulders, letting the child release months of accumulated fear and stress. Officer Torres returned to the chambers. "CPS is en route to the mother's residence now, Your Honor. They have police escort. Tyler Foster is being picked up from Foster's home where he's currently with a babysitter. ETA to Children's Hospital is approximately 20 minutes. Good. Judge turned back to Emma, who was beginning to calm, her sobs subsiding into shaky breaths. Emma, I need to ask you some more questions. I know this is hard, but it's very important. Has ever hurt you? Not just Tyler, but you specifically. Emma hesitated, then nodded slowly. Not like he hurt Tyler, but he grabs my arm sometimes, really tight, when he wants me to go to my room or stop talking. It hurts, but it doesn't leave marks like Tyler's. And once he pushed me when I was in his way. I fell down and scraped my knee, but Mommy said I just tripped. She made me say I tripped if anyone asked. Has he ever touched you in ways that made you uncomfortable, private places, or in ways that felt wrong? No, Emma said quickly, definitively. Nothing like that, just mean. He's just mean and scary, and I don't like being there when he's there. Judge felt a small measure of relief, though the situation was still gravely serious. Okay, and your mother, does she know that hurts you and Tyler? She sees it, Emma said, her voice small. She's there when it happens. Sometimes she tells to stop, but mostly she just makes excuses. Says we need to be quieter or better behaved or that we provoked him. Then later she tells us what to say if anyone asks about bruises. She practices with us, makes us say the right things over and over until we get it perfect. Like she practiced with you for court today. Yeah, for weeks. Every night after dinner she'd make me sit at the kitchen table and answer her questions. She had a whole list. She told me exactly what to say about living with her, about Daddy, about everything. She said if I didn't say it right, the judge would make me live with Daddy full time, and then would be so upset he'd leave Mommy, and Mommy would be sad forever, and it would be all my fault for not loving her enough to help her. The manipulation was textbook, and Judge had seen variations of it countless times. Parental alienation combined with emotional abuse, using a child's natural love and guilt as weapons. But knowing it was common didn't make it any less enraging. Emma, Jennifer spoke up, her voice thick with emotion. Your daddy has been fighting to protect you this whole time. He knew something was wrong. He tried to tell the court, tried to get help. You are not the reason anything bad happened. You're the reason we can finally fix it. Emma looked at the attorney with red-rimmed eyes. Can I see my daddy now, please? Judge checked her watch. They'd been in chambers for almost 40 minutes. In the courtroom, David Foster was probably losing his mind with worry, while was likely plotting her legal strategy with the time to bring this to a head. Yes, Judge said, standing. But first, we're going to go back into that courtroom and I'm going to make some orders that are going to change things very quickly. Emma, I need you to be brave for just a little bit longer. Can you do that? Emma nodded, wiping her face with her sleeve. Bailey stood as she did, staying glued to her side. One more thing, officer said. Bailey's behavior, his whining, his alerts during Emma's testimony, that's exactly what he's trained to do when he senses extreme distress in his handler. This dog has been telling us something was wrong from the moment he came into that courtroom. We just needed to learn how to listen. Judge looked down at the golden retriever, who gazed back with those intelligent brown eyes. Good boy, Bailey, she said quietly. Very good boy. You just might have saved 2 children's lives today. Bailey's tail wagged once, twice, and then he turned his attention back to Emma, ready to face whatever came next, ready to protect his girl no matter what. And as they prepared to return to the courtroom, Judge knew that what came next was going to shatter Foster's carefully constructed lies once and for all. The door to Judge's chambers remained closed for several more minutes as the judge made a series of urgent phone calls. Emma sat on the couch with Bailey's head in her lap, her small fingers absently stroking his silky ears while Dr. Winters sat beside her, offering quiet reassurance. The child had stopped crying, but her face carried the exhausted, hollowed-out expression of someone who had just purged a toxic secret that had been poisoning them from the inside. Jennifer stood near the window, her phone pressed to her ear as she spoke in hushed, urgent tones with someone from Child Protective Services. Officer Torres had left briefly and returned with juice boxes and crackers from the courthouse vending machines, setting them on the coffee table in front of Emma with a gentle smile. The little girl hadn't touched them yet, but Bailey's nose had twitched with interest at the crackers. "Emma," Dr. Winters said softly, "I know you've already been very brave today, but I need to ask you something important. When you go back into the courtroom, Judge is going to make some decisions based on what you've told us. Your mother is going to be very upset. How do you feel about that?" Emma's hand stilled in Bailey's fur. She was quiet for a long moment, her hazel eyes distant as she processed the question. When she finally spoke, her voice was small but steady. "Mommy's going to say I'm lying. She always says I'm lying when I tell the truth about things she doesn't want people to know." "What makes you think she'll say that?" Dr. Winters asked, though she already knew the answer. She was documenting the patterns, building the psychological profile that would be crucial in the coming legal proceedings. "Because that's what she did when I told my teacher that pushed me. The teacher called Mommy, and Mommy came to school all dressed up and nice, and she cried and said I had a very active imagination and that I sometimes made up stories for attention because of the divorce. She was so convincing. Even I almost believed her, even though I knew it really happened." Emma's voice cracked slightly. "The teacher believed Mommy. Everyone always believes Mommy. She's really good at making people believe her." Judge, who had just hung up her phone, turned to face Emma directly. "Emma, I want you to understand something very clearly. I believe you. Dr. Winters believes you. Your father believes you. And by the time we walk back into that courtroom, we're going to have evidence that supports everything you've told us." "What kind of evidence?" Emma asked, a flicker of hope crossing her features. "Your brother Tyler is being examined by doctors right now. If he has bruises like you described, they're going to document them with photographs and medical reports. That's physical evidence that can't be explained away. Additionally, I'm ordering an immediate investigation of your mother's home. Investigators will find proof that has been living there in violation of court orders. Those are facts, Emma, not stories, not imagination. Facts." Emma absorbed this information, her young mind trying to process the enormity of what was happening. What's going to happen to Mommy? It was a question that broke hearts. Even after everything, Emma still loved her mother, still worried about her. That was the terrible complexity of child abuse cases. Children could simultaneously fear and love their abusers, especially when that abuser was a parent. "Your mother is going to face consequences for not protecting you and Tyler," Judge said honestly. "She allowed someone dangerous to live in your home. She coached you to lie in court. She failed in her most basic duty as a parent, which is to keep her children safe. But Emma, those consequences are not your fault. They are the result of choices your mother made. Do you understand that?" Emma nodded slowly, though tears were forming in her eyes again. "I don't want Mommy to go to jail. I just want her to be nice again, like she used to be before everything got so scary." Dr. Winters squeezed Emma's shoulder gently. "I know, sweetheart, but sometimes people need to face consequences before they can change. And right now, the most important thing is making sure you and Tyler are safe." Officer Torres' radio crackled to life, and he stepped away to take the communication. When he returned, his face was grim. "Your Honor, CPS has secured Tyler Foster. They're reporting visible bruising on the child's upper arms and left thigh, consistent with grip marks and what appears to be impact trauma. Pediatric examination is at Children's Hospital. Also, officers at the residence have confirmed that male clothing, toiletries, and personal effects are present throughout the home, including the master bedroom. A was present at the residence and has been detained for questioning. He has an outstanding warrant for failure to appear on a previous domestic violence charge from 2 years ago." The room went absolutely silent except for Emma's sharp intake of breath. Judge's face hardened into an expression that would have made seasoned attorneys nervous. An outstanding warrant for domestic violence, and he's been living with 2 small children. Dear God. Jennifer's pen was flying across her legal pad. Your Honor, this constitutes clear and convincing evidence of child endangerment. I'm prepared to file emergency motions for. Already ahead of you, Ms. Judge interrupted. I'm issuing an emergency order right now removing both children from Foster's custody immediately. Mr. Foster will be granted temporary full custody pending a full evidentiary hearing. Mrs. Foster will be allowed only supervised visitation, and I'm referring this case to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges. Emma had gone very still, her face pale. We don't have to go back to Mommy's house. No, sweetheart, Judge said firmly. You don't have to go back. You're going to stay with your daddy, and Tyler will be with you as soon as the doctors finish checking him over. The relief that washed over Emma's face was so profound it was almost physical. Her shoulders dropped, releasing tension that had probably been there for months. Her breathing deepened, as if she were able to fully inflate her lungs for the first time in forever. Bailey sensed the change immediately, his tail beginning to wag as he licked Emma's hand. Daddy's not going to get in trouble, Emma asked, needing confirmation one more time. Your daddy is a hero, Jennifer said, her voice thick with emotion. He fought for you when no one else would listen. He trusted his instincts as a father, and he was right. You're both heroes. You found a way to tell the truth when you were too scared to speak it out loud. Emma looked down at Bailey, her fingers resuming their gentle stroking of his fur. Bailey helped. I don't think I could have done it without him. When I was saying Mommy's words but tapping the SOS, I could feel him understanding. He knew. He was trying to tell everyone too. Officer, who had been Bailey's handler in the hallway, spoke up. Service dogs are trained to detect distress in their handlers. Bailey's training is specifically geared toward anxiety and trauma response. What you were feeling while giving that testimony, the fear, the conflict, the desperation, Bailey was reading all of that through your body language, your breathing, your heart rate. Even without the Morse code, he was alerting that you were in severe distress. The code just helped us understand what he was trying to tell us. He's a very good boy, Emma said, and a small, genuine smile crossed her face, the first real smile anyone in that room had seen from her. Judge checked her watch again. They'd been in chambers for nearly an hour now. All right, it's time. Emma, we're going to go back into the courtroom. I'm going to explain my decisions, and your mother and her attorney are going to object loudly. It might be scary and unpleasant, but I need you to remember that Bailey will be right there with you, and your father will be there, and all of us are on your side. Can you do this? Emma took a deep breath, her hand gripping Bailey's collar. The golden retriever stood immediately, positioning himself at her side in perfect working dog posture. I can do it, she said quietly. I'm tired of being scared all the time. That's my brave girl, Dr. Winters said warmly. Remember, Emma, telling the truth was the hardest part. Everything else is just adults doing their jobs to fix the situation you should never have been in. As they prepared to leave the chambers, Judge paused at the door. One more thing, Emma. When we get out there, if at any point you feel overwhelmed or unsafe, I want you to do the SOS signal again, right there in the courtroom where everyone can see. Can you do that? Emma nodded. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. Exactly. And every single person in that courtroom will now know exactly what it means and will respond accordingly. You have a voice now, Emma. You've earned it. They filed out of the chambers, Judge in the lead, still without her robe, looking less like a judge and more like an avenging angel. Emma followed with Bailey pressed against her leg, Dr. Winters walking beside them. Jennifer came next, her arms full of folders and her expression determined. Officers tore and brought up the rear, their presence both protective and official. The courthouse hallway seemed longer than before, Emma's small shoes clicking against the marble with a rhythm that matched her hammering heart. With each step, she could feel the weight of what was about to happen. Mommy was going to be so angry. Mommy was going to deny everything. Mommy was going to use that voice she used, the one that made everyone believe her instead of Emma. But then Bailey pressed closer, and Emma remembered the SOS tapping through his fur, remembered that someone had finally understood, finally listened. She thought about Tyler, her baby brother with his bruises and his tears, being examined by doctors who would see the truth written on his small body. Judge reached the courtroom doors and paused, looking back at Emma. Ready. Emma straightened her spine, lifted her chin in unconscious imitation of the judge's own posture, and nodded. Ready. The doors swung open. The courtroom had transformed in their absence. David Foster was on his feet, packing like a caged animal, his face streaked with dried tears. Foster sat rigid at her table, her perfect composure restored but her eyes glittering with barely contained fury. Was on his phone, speaking in urgent whispers. The gallery had filled with more observers. Word had spread through the courthouse that something unprecedented was happening in courtroom 4B. The moment Emma walked through those doors with Bailey at her side, every eye in the room turned toward her. David made a choked sound and started forward, but Jennifer put a restraining hand on his arm. Not yet, her gesture said. Wait just a little longer. His eyes locked on her daughter, and Emma felt that familiar pull of fear and obligation. But this time, Bailey was there, solid and warm against her leg. Dr. Winters was right behind her. Judge was already moving toward the bench, her expression brooking no interference. Emma kept walking, one foot in front of the other, toward the witness stand where this had all begun, toward the truth that would finally set her and Tyler free. And as she climbed back into that too large chair with Bailey settling protectively at her feet, Emma Foster understood something profound. She wasn't alone anymore. She had never been as alone as Mommy had made her believe. The truth was about to shatter everything. And for the first time in months, Emma wasn't afraid of the breaking. Judge didn't bother with her judicial robe. She strode directly to the bench with the purposeful gait of someone who had made a decision that would not be swayed by legal theatrics or emotional manipulation. The court reporter, sensing the gravity of the moment, positioned her hands over the stenography machine with heightened attention. The bailiffs had instinctively moved to more strategic positions around the courtroom, their bodies tense and ready. This court is back in session, Judge announced, her voice cutting through the nervous murmur of the gallery like a blade through silk. She didn't use her gavel, she didn't need to. The authority in her tone was enough to silence every whisper, every shuffle, every breath. Foster sat perfectly still at her table, but those who looked closely could see the minute tremors in her hands, the white-knuckled grip on her leather portfolio, the muscle twitching at her jaw. Had ended his phone call and now wore the expression of an attorney who had just realized his case had gone catastrophically wrong but hadn't yet figured out how to salvage it. David Foster stood beside his table, unable to sit, his entire body vibrating with desperate hope and barely contained emotion. His red-rimmed eyes were fixed on his daughter in the witness stand, taking in every detail. The way she sat now, the way her hand rested confidently on Bailey's head, the subtle shift in her demeanor from terrified puppet to exhausted but resolute child. For the record, Judge began, her words crisp and deliberate, I have spent the last hour in chambers conducting what I deem to be a necessary welfare check on the minor child Emma Foster. Present during that interview were myself, Dr. Sarah Winters, court-appointed child psychologist, officers Torres and Ms. Jennifer representing the father. The child's service dog, Bailey, was also present as the child's prescribed emotional support animal. Was on his feet instantly. Your Honor, I must object in the strongest possible terms. An ex parte interview with the minor child without representation for my client is highly irregular and— Mister, I don't recall asking for your input, Judge said coldly. You can object all you want. It's noted for the record. But when I have reasonable suspicion that a child is in immediate danger, I have both the authority and the obligation to investigate that suspicion using any means necessary. Your objection is overruled. Sit down." The attorney sat, but his face had flushed an angry red. He leaned toward, whispering urgently, but she wasn't listening. Her eyes were fixed on Emma with an intensity that made several people in the gallery uncomfortable. It wasn't a mother's loving gaze. It was the look of someone watching their carefully constructed world begin to crumble. "During that interview," Judge continued, "Emma Foster provided testimony that raises serious concerns about her safety and the safety of her younger brother, Tyler Foster, age 4. I have subsequently ordered and received preliminary reports that corroborate the child's testimony. Therefore, I am prepared to issue several emergency orders." "Your Honor, please," tried again, but Judge cut him off with a look that could have frozen fire. "Mister, your client is about to face some very serious allegations. I suggest you save your objections until you've heard what they are. Officer Torres, please read the preliminary report from Child Protective Services." Officer Torres stepped forward, pulling a document from a folder that had been delivered via courthouse runner just minutes before. His voice was steady but carried an undercurrent of suppressed anger as he read. "At approximately 2:45 p.m. today, CPS Emergency Response Team, accompanied by county sheriff's deputies, arrived at the residence of Foster at 1247 Maple Creek Drive. The team secured custody of minor child Tyler James Foster, age 4, who was in the care of a babysitter identified as. Upon initial visual examination, CPS worker noted visible bruising on the child's upper arms, left thigh, and lower back. The bruising appeared to be in various stages of healing, indicating multiple incidents over time. David Foster made a sound like he'd been punched in the stomach, his hand clutching his chest. Jennifer's arm went around his shoulders, steadying him as he swayed. The child was immediately transported to County Children's Hospital, Officer Torres continued, where Dr. Reeves, a pediatric specialist in child abuse recognition, conducted a full examination. Dr. Reeves' preliminary findings indicate that the bruising patterns on Tyler Foster are consistent with forceful gripping and impact trauma. The bruises on the upper arms show clear fingermark patterns. In Dr. Reeves' professional opinion, these injuries are non-accidental and constitute evidence of physical abuse. The courtroom erupted in gasps and shocked murmurs. Shot to her feet, her carefully maintained composure finally shattering. "That's ridiculous. Tyler is a rambunctious 4-year-old boy. He climbs on everything, he falls constantly, Mrs. Foster," Judge's voice cracked like a whip, "you will sit down and remain silent, or I will have you removed from this courtroom and held in contempt. This is your only warning." Remained standing for a moment, defiance blazing in her eyes, but grabbed her arm and physically pulled her back into her chair, whispering harshly in her ear. She sat, but her face had transformed from the serene mask of maternal concern into something ugly. Jaw clenched, lips pressed into a thin line, nostrils flared with barely suppressed rage. "Officer Torres, continue," Judge ordered. Additionally, investigators at the residence found extensive evidence that an adult male has been residing at the property. Male clothing in the master bedroom closet, toiletries in the master bathroom, personal effects including mail addressed to at that address. Mr. was present at the residence and was detained for questioning. A background check revealed that, age 37, has an outstanding warrant for failure to appear on a domestic violence charge from March 2023 in neighboring Pierce County. He was subsequently arrested on that warrant. Now it was turn to go pale. He hadn't known about the warrant, had clearly kept that detail from her own attorney. His hands shuffled frantically through his papers as if looking for something that could possibly salvage this disaster, but there was nothing. The evidence was damning, comprehensive, and irrefutable. Your Honor, Jennifer stood, her voice trembling slightly with emotion but legally precise. In light of this evidence, I move for immediate emergency custody modification. The evidence clearly demonstrates that Mrs. Foster has willfully violated court orders, has placed both minor children in a dangerous environment, has failed to protect them from abuse, and has coached the children to lie about their living situation. This constitutes child endangerment and possibly criminal obstruction of justice. Motion granted, Judge said without hesitation. But we're not done yet. Mrs. Foster, stand up. Stood slowly, her body rigid, her face now a mask of barely controlled fury. Gone was any pretense of the devoted mother. What remained was someone who had been caught and knew it, and the transition was chilling to witness. Mrs. Foster, Judge's voice was cold steel, your daughter Emma spent months living in fear in your home. She witnessed her younger brother being physically abused. She herself was grabbed, pushed, and intimidated. She was coached extensively to lie in this courtroom, to lie under oath about her living situation, about her, about the presence of an unauthorized and dangerous adult in your home. Do you have anything to say about these allegations? For a moment said nothing. Then catastrophically she spoke, and in doing so confirmed everything. Didn't mean to hurt anyone. The words burst out of her like water from a broken dam. He just has a temper sometimes. He's been under a lot of stress, and the kids can be so difficult, especially Tyler. He never listens. He's always making noise when he's trying to relax. If they would just behave better, if they would just be quieter, wouldn't get so frustrated. And that warrant is from a misunderstanding with his ex-girlfriend who was crazy and vindictive and... She stopped abruptly, her hand flying to her mouth as she realized what she'd just done. In her panic and anger, she had confessed to everything, confirmed his presence, confirmed his temper, confirmed the abuse, even tried to justify it by blaming the victims. It was a prosecutor's dream and a defense attorney's nightmare. Had buried his face in his hands. "Oh my God," he muttered, stop talking right now." Wasn't stopping. The dam had broken, and months of maintaining the perfect facade had finally exhausted her capacity for deception. Emma is exaggerating everything. She's always been dramatic, always seeking attention. And David put her up to this. I know he did. He's been trying to turn the kids against me since the divorce. He taught her that Morse code nonsense specifically to use against me in court. This is all his manipulation, his vindictiveness because I fell in love with someone else. Mrs. Foster, Judge's voice cut through the tirade, are you seriously standing in my courtroom trying to blame your ex-husband for your own child's testimony about abuse? Are you actually suggesting that a 7-year-old orchestrated an elaborate scheme involving coded distress signals because she wants attention? She's lying, children lie, she. Mrs. Foster, Judge's gavel came down with a crack that echoed like a gunshot. Your son is at the hospital right now with documented injuries that medical professionals have identified as non-accidental trauma. Your home has been searched, and evidence of your deception has been. You have just admitted in open court that a man with an active domestic violence warrant has been living with your children and has, in your own words, a temper that causes him to hurt them when they're difficult. Do you understand what you've just done? The color drained from his face as the reality of her confession settled in. She looked around the courtroom wildly, as if searching for an escape route, but there was none. Bailiffs had moved closer, ready to intervene if necessary. The gallery was completely silent, dozens of witnesses to her self-destruction. I want to see my daughter, said suddenly, her voice taking on a desperate, pleading quality. Emma, baby, tell them Mommy loves you. Tell them I would never let anyone hurt you on purpose. Tell them. No, Emma's voice rang out from the witness stand, clear and strong. It was the first time she had spoken since returning to the courtroom, and every head turned toward her. Bailey had stood up, pressing against her leg, but Emma's hand was steady on his head. No, Mommy, I'm not going to lie anymore. You told me to lie. You made me practice lies for weeks. You said if I told the truth, bad things would happen, but bad things were already happening. Hurt Tyler, hurt me, and you let him. You chose him over us." Tears were streaming down Emma's face now, but her voice never wavered. "I love you, Mommy, but I can't live with you when you let hurt us. I can't protect Tyler by myself. I'm only 7. It's not supposed to be my job." Made a move toward her daughter, but 2 bailiffs stepped forward, blocking her path. "Emma, please. I'm your mother, you can't." "Bailiffs, remove Mrs. Foster from the courtroom," Judge ordered. "She's becoming disruptive, and I won't have this child traumatized further." Began shouting as the bailiffs took her arms, her carefully constructed persona completely shattered. "This isn't fair. Emma is lying. David manipulated her. You can't take my children away. I'm their mother. I'm their mother." Her voice echoed down the hallway as she was escorted out, the courtroom doors closing behind her with a decisive thud that seemed to mark the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. In the sudden silence that followed, David Foster was already moving. He crossed the courtroom in 3 long strides and reached the witness stand where Emma sat crying. "Baby girl," he whispered, gathering her into his arms as she climbed down. "My brave, brave girl, it's over. You're safe now. Tyler's safe. I've got you." Emma clung to her father, her small body shaking with sobs, while Bailey pressed against both of them, his tail wagging slowly, his job finally complete. Judge watched the reunion for a moment, then cleared her throat. "Mr. Foster, emergency full custody is granted immediately. Tyler will be released to your care as soon as the hospital completes their examination. Mrs. Foster is granted supervised visitation only, pending a full evidentiary hearing. I'm also referring this case to the District Attorney's Office for criminal investigation regarding child endangerment, obstruction of justice, and potential charges related to coaching a witness to commit perjury." David looked up, tears streaming down his face. "Thank you, Your Honor, thank you so much." "Don't thank me," Judge said quietly. "Thank your daughter. She's the one who found a way to tell the truth when everyone was trying to silence her. 3 months had passed since that dramatic afternoon in courtroom 4B, and the morning sunlight streaming through the tall windows of the county courthouse painted everything in shades of gold and hope. The same courtroom that had witnessed Emma Foster's terror and Foster's spectacular downfall was now filled with a completely different energy, one of resolution, healing, and cautious optimism. Emma sat in the gallery this time, not the witness stand. She wore jeans and a purple sweater with a unicorn on it, clothes she had picked out herself, not something selected to project an image. Her hair hung loose around her shoulders in natural waves, free from the tight braids that had pulled at her scalp. Most remarkably, she was smiling, a genuine, unguarded smile as she whispered something to Bailey, who sat beside her with his tail thumping softly against the wooden pew. Next to Emma, 4-year-old Tyler Foster clutched a stuffed dinosaur and swung his legs happily, occasionally reaching over to pat Bailey's head. The bruises that had covered his small body 3 months ago had faded completely, replaced by the normal scrapes and bumps of an active preschooler who was finally allowed to be loud, messy, and joyfully chaotic without fear of violent repercussions. David Foster sat on Emma's other side, one arm around his daughter's shoulders, looking like a different man than the desperate, exhausted father who had fought so hard to be heard. He had gained back some weight, the dark circles under his eyes had faded, and most importantly, the haunted look of helpless frustration had been replaced by the peaceful expression of someone who had won the fight that mattered most. His small 2-bedroom apartment had been transformed into a real home. Colorful artwork from the kids covered the refrigerator. Toys were scattered in organized chaos across the living room, and laughter echoed through the halls daily. Jennifer sat at the attorney's table, her folders neatly organized, but there would be no contentious arguments today. This was a final custody hearing, but the outcome had been determined by facts, evidence, and the unwavering testimony of a 7-year-old girl who had found her voice. At the opposite table sat, but his client was notably absent. Foster was not in the courtroom. She was currently residing in the county jail, awaiting trial on multiple charges: 2 counts of child endangerment, obstruction of justice, subornation of perjury, and conspiracy to violate a court order. Her bail had been set high, and she had been unable to meet it. Her boyfriend was in a different facility facing his own array of charges, including assault on a minor, violation of a restraining order from a previous case, and failure to appear on the outstanding domestic violence warrant. The investigation that had followed Emma's testimony had been thorough and damning. Forensic interviews with both children, conducted by specialists trained in child trauma, had revealed a pattern of abuse, manipulation, and intimidation that stretched back nearly a year. Tyler, once he felt safe enough to talk, had described incidents that made seasoned investigators' blood run cold: being locked in closets for crying, having food as punishment, witnessing violent outbursts toward, and being threatened that he would receive the same treatment if he wasn't good. Emma's testimony had been even more detailed. She had described the coaching sessions, the threats, the careful construction of lies designed to fool judges and social workers. She had revealed that had created a special company behavior that both children were required to perform whenever anyone from the court system was present: smiles on command, rehearsed phrases, a complete performance of the happy family they were supposed to be. Neighbors, once interviewed, had reported hearing yelling and crashes from the Foster residence at odd hours. Tyler's preschool teachers noted that he had become withdrawn and anxious over the past year, frequently having accidents despite being fully potty trained. Emma's second-grade teacher remembered the incident she had reported, only to be convinced by his Oscar-worthy performance that it was all imagination. The evidence had piled up like an avalanche, burying any chance might have had of maintaining her claims of innocence. Her own outburst in court, captured on official transcript and witnessed by dozens of people, had sealed her fate before her attorney could even attempt damage control. Now, Judge entered the courtroom for what would likely be the final time regarding the Foster case. She had followed the children's progress through required status reports, and the transformation documented in those reports had reinforced her conviction that her instincts that day had been correct. She settled into her chair behind the bench, her silver hair gleaming in the morning light, and surveyed the courtroom with satisfaction. "Good morning, everyone," she began, her voice warm but official. "We're here today for the final custody determination in the matter of Foster v. Foster. Before we proceed with the formalities, I'd like to note for the record that both minor children appear healthy, happy, and thriving. Dr. Winters, you've been conducting regular sessions with Emma and Tyler. Would you like to provide your professional assessment?" Dr. Sarah Winters stood from her seat in the gallery, carrying a folder but speaking from memory. "Your Honor, I've been seeing both children twice weekly since they were placed in their father's care. Emma has been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder and anxiety, which we're treating through play therapy and cognitive behavioral techniques. Her progress has been remarkable. She's sleeping through the night now. Her nightmares have decreased significantly, and she's re-engaging with school activities and friendships that she had withdrawn from during the period of abuse." The psychologist glanced at Emma with genuine affection. Emma has also been working through complicated feelings about her mother. She loves her, but she's also angry with her and hurt by her. That's normal and healthy. She's learning that she can love someone and still recognize that they harmed her, and that protecting herself doesn't make her a bad daughter. Emma looked down at her lap, her fingers finding Bailey's fur. The dog leaned into her touch, providing silent support as the adults discussed her trauma and healing. "Tyler is younger, so his processing looks different," Dr. Winters continued. "He's been expressing his experiences through play. Sometimes his dinosaurs get angry and hurt the other toys, and we work through those scenarios together. He's also much more physically affectionate with his father now, constantly seeking reassurance that he's safe and loved. The good news is that children Tyler's age are remarkably resilient when removed from abusive situations and placed in stable, loving environments. With continued therapy and support, both children should be able to process this trauma and move forward into healthy childhood development. Judge nodded, making notes. Thank you, Dr. Winters. Mr. Foster, how are things going at home? David stood, clearing his throat. Your Honor, it's been an adjustment, a wonderful adjustment. I won't pretend it's been easy. Emma has some tough days where the anxiety gets bad and Tyler still has occasional nightmares, but we're figuring it out together. We have routines now. Breakfast together every morning, family dinner every night, bedtime stories, weekend park visits. Simple things, but they matter. His voice grew thick with emotion. I enrolled both kids in art therapy in addition to Dr. Winters' sessions. Emma's teacher says she's excelling in school again. Tyler's preschool reports that he's coming out of his shell, playing with other children, laughing more. They're being kids again, Your Honor. Just normal, happy, messy kids. That's all I ever wanted for them. And the supervised visitation with Mrs. Foster? Judge asked, though she already knew the answer from the reports. Jennifer stood to respond. Your Honor, Mrs. Foster has been offered supervised visitation opportunities twice weekly at the Family Visitation Center. She attended the first 2 sessions, but has not attended any in the past 10 weeks. The children have expressed relief rather than disappointment at her absence, which is both sad and telling. Emma has stated clearly that she's willing to see her mother eventually, but only when her mother takes responsibility and gets help. Tyler has not asked about his mother. The courtroom fell silent for a moment as the weight of that reality settled over everyone. A mother who had fought so desperately to maintain custody had, when faced with the consequences of her actions and the inability to control the narrative, simply walked away from her children. It was perhaps the most honest thing Foster had done in years. Very well, Judge said, opening her folder. I've reviewed all reports, psychological evaluations, home studies, and recommendations. Based on the totality of the evidence and the best interests of the minor children, I am prepared to issue my final ruling. Emma sat up, her hand tightening in Bailey's fur. David reached over and squeezed her shoulder reassuringly. It is the order of this court that David James Foster is awarded sole legal and physical custody of minor children Emma Rose Foster and Tyler James Foster, effective immediately and permanently. Foster's parental rights are not terminated at this time, but she is restricted to supervised therapeutic visitation only, contingent upon completion of court-ordered parenting classes, individual therapy, and domestic violence intervention programs. Any future modification of custody or visitation shall require clear and convincing evidence of sustained rehabilitation, and that such modification would serve the children's best interests. Judge looked directly at Emma, her expression softening. Emma, I want you to know something. What you did that day, finding a way to tell the truth when you were too scared to say the words out loud, that took more courage than most adults will ever have to show in their entire lives. You saved yourself and your brother. You should be very proud of who you are. Emma's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled through them. Thank you, Judge, and thank you for listening to Bailey. He was trying to tell everyone too. Yes, he was, the judge agreed, looking at the golden retriever with respect. Bailey, you're a very good dog and a very good friend. Emma is lucky to have you. Bailey's tail wagged enthusiastically, as if he understood every word. Several people in the gallery chuckled softly, the tension breaking into something warmer. Mr. Foster, Judge continued, the court recognizes that you never gave up on your children even when the system wasn't listening as well as it should have. You trusted your instincts, you documented everything, and you fought through proper legal channels. Your persistence saved your children's lives. This court apologizes that it took so long to see what you were trying to tell us. David wiped at his eyes, nodding. Thank you, Your Honor. All that matters is that they're safe now. Judge closed her folder with finality. This case is concluded. The Foster family is free to go home together." The gavel came down one final time, but instead of the sharp crack of judgment, it sounded like the closing of a book, one chapter ending so another could begin. Emma jumped up from her seat and threw her arms around her father's waist. Tyler, not wanting to be left out, launched himself at them both, his dinosaur flying through the air. David gathered both children into his arms, lifting them, holding them, finally able to protect them the way he had always wanted to. Bailey circled the family group, tail wagging furiously, occasionally pushing his nose between them to be included in the celebration. He had done his job. He had kept his girl safe, had helped her find her voice, and now he would continue doing what he did best. Being there, being steady, being love in the form of golden fur and patient brown eyes. As the Foster family prepared to leave the courtroom, Judge called out one more time, "Emma." The little girl turned back, her father's hand in hers, Tyler on David's hip, Bailey at her side. "Yes, Your Honor. Remember what I told you once, that you had a voice now and you'd earned it. Don't ever forget that. Don't ever let anyone silence you again." Emma stood taller, her chin lifting with determination that shouldn't have belonged to a 7-year-old but somehow suited her perfectly. "I won't. I promise." And as the Foster family walked out of courtroom 4B into the bright afternoon sunshine, they left behind the darkness of secrets, lies, and fear. Ahead of them stretched the ordinary, beautiful, chaotic landscape of a normal life, one filled with homework struggles and bedtime negotiations, with laughter and occasional tears, with park visits and family dinners, and all the small, precious moments that children deserved. Emma looked down at Bailey, her constant companion, her translator when words failed, her courage when fear overwhelmed. "Come on, Bailey," she said, her voice light and free. "Let's go home." The golden retriever's tail wagged in agreement, and together, father, daughter, son, and dog, they walked into their new beginning. In her chambers, Judge watched them go from her window, then turned back to her desk where 17 new case files awaited her attention. 17 more families in crisis, 17 more children who needed someone to listen, to see, to act. She picked up the first file, settled her reading glasses on her nose, and got back to work. Because somewhere out there, another child might be signaling for help in whatever way they could. And this time, the system would be ready to listen. The end. Sometimes the smallest voices carry the most important messages. Sometimes courage looks like a 7-year-old girl moving her fingers through a dog's fur in a pattern most people wouldn't recognize. And sometimes justice requires nothing more than someone finally choosing to believe that a child's fear is real, that a father's instincts matter, and that the truth, no matter how well hidden, will eventually find its way into the light.